Welcome to this Mtech Access webinar. At Mtech Access, we provide health economics and outcomes research and market access services from strategy through to implementation. We work with over 80 NHS associates to bring our pharmaceutical and medtech clients authentic insights into the NHS. Our unique NHS relationships guide and validate everything we do in the UK. We can help you answer key questions related to the NHS, from how to communicate with integrated care systems, places and primary care networks, to how to capture pathways of care. Get in touch today to discuss your market access goals. First though, I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Good afternoon, welcome to the Mtech Access Words of Wisdom webinar. I'm Tom Clark. It's great to be back with a slightly different format than usual. So I've got a wonderful panel of 4 guests covering most of the bases around health and care, hopefully, for a bit of a Q&A session to explore all sorts of different things. Normally we look at one topic. Today we're trying to cover as much as we can do. Within the audience or at home, you've all submitted questions in advance, so thank you for that. We're going to try and get through whatever we can do today. Some of it we've picked out themes to distill into a single question. There's a few specific questions that are in there as well. We're also trying something new. I've got a poll that's going to pop up in a second, trying to get a bit of your insight into what you find useful for next year to help us think about our agenda and what we're going to bring to you next year. So please have a quick look at that and make a quick response, and then you'll return back to the discussion. Also, as we go through the conversation today, feel free to put questions in the questions box through the GoToWebinar platform. We'll try and weave some of those if we can do. Apologies if we don't get around to them. If we can't get to them in the discussion, we might try and get back to you after the event. So I think that's the admin out of the way. On with the show, and in no particular order, the panel today, a group of people whose job titles themselves, when I introduce them, do them a huge disservice because they're far more than that, but it's what we've got to go off for today. So joined by Ewan Maule, who is Head of Medicines Management at Sunderland CCG and Interim Chief Pharmacist for the North East and Cumbria ICS. Liz Cross, who's a nurse practitioner from Attenborough Surgery in Watford. Patrick McGinley, head of costing and service line reporting at Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells Trust. And David Thorne, a fellow director of mine at Mtech Access, and more importantly, development director of the Well Up North PCN, Primary Care Network. So thank you everyone for joining me today. Good to see you. Just to kick us off, just wanted to go around and ask you all what you see the most important thing that's happened in the NHS this year as being, from your own perspective in your corner of the health and social care system, what stood out this year. So Ewan, I'll come to you first, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think the most important thing that's happened this year, aside from the obvious, is that the decision to restructure the NHS has continued at a time when I think probably there were points where some of us might have thought this is going to be delayed for a little while. It doesn't seem as though it's going to be. As we get closer to it, it seems as though that's going to go ahead, and that's probably been unsettling for large parts of the NHS, knowing that this is on the horizon at the time that we've got unprecedented pressures, even more so than we had during what most of us probably thought of as the peak of the pandemic. So that's the big one for me, is that decision to carry on down this road at this time.
Great stuff, thanks Ewan. Liz, I'll come to you next.
So past year I've developed my website Manor, so I'm a nurse and GP practice, so still a lot of my work now is telephone triage, and then now it's more and more face-to-face, but still we do rely quite heavily on telephone triage. Doesn't work for every situation, but it used appropriately, it can be really, really useful. We are part of a PC, well, we're a single practice PCN, thank goodness, which makes life so much easier for me. So obviously our PCN, they've that we've made changes, and we've only got one team to discuss those with. So our PCN is quite well established now. We are, we're looking to change services. We've got, a couple of years ago, all you saw were doctors, nurses, the management team, and that's all you saw in primary care. And now, I've got physios, I've got pharmacists, I've got ambulance crew arriving next week. I've got a whole mental health team. I've got an amazing set of dietitians. I've got social prescribers as well. I've got all these different people that I can now refer to. So when I'm doing my, standard chronic diseases now, it's not just the doctor and nurse that you're going to see. We're going to introduce you to the whole team, which is brilliant, because not everything can be solved with a pill. So yes, it's all quite exciting, working out how it's all going to fit together.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. I think we're going to come back to some of the sort of the impact of that a bit later on. Patrick, what's happened in your world?
I think it's probably closer to Ewan's experience of the continued reorganisation, but particularly the continued separation between funding flows and activity or outcome measures. We're continuing towards whatever's in the draft bill this week, and the fact that it gets delayed and delayed as a process means that we'll have less and less time to appreciate it before we implement it. But the continued thought that there is very little link at the moment, particularly in secondary care, between the volume of work that we're doing and the payment that we're receiving for it. And while there's an assumption that next year will be tough, we don't know in exactly what form. And on one hand, we're busily planning to do things we've never done before. We're looking to develop a 4-theatre module at Maidstone to help East Kent with their orthopaedic work. After 15 years of pointing at East Kent and going, you don't want your hips done there. Now we're going to do them with them. But we don't know how it's funded, which is just marvellous. And for an accountant, well, it's hard to believe I'm 27. The worry is taking care of the appearance.
Good stuff. Thanks, Patrick. David, what have you seen in the NHS this year?
Yeah, well, it's great going last, isn't it? Because probably the most important thing I heard this year, Jill Morgan, who is the chair of the Gloucestershire ICS. So there you go. Just to Ewan's point, Gloucestershire ICS is up and running. It's got a really good chair. I heard her say something. This is the first ever NHS change predicated on difference. And that's interesting. So I'm 300 miles away from Liz. Our PCN has got the same excitement about those similar kind of roles, but the people might be doing slightly different things. Because in rural Northumberland, the social prescribing team will be doing different things from suburban Watford, and quite rightly. So I think that is something. Just again, picking up Liz's point, where would we have been in primary care with COVID if it wasn't for PCNs? It was, gosh, if we would have, it's been hard enough, but where would we have been without that group structure? But the thing that I would choose that is different, the main thing I wanted to say was, Patrick's joking about his age. I'm probably one of the oldest people, if not the oldest person in this whole session. All that time, we've heard stuff about care closer to home and outside hospital. I've seen more practical progress on that in the last year than I've seen in the previous 40. I think that's slightly forgotten. Every cloud has a silver lining, and where the whole service needs to be patted on the back for some of the things it's achieved.
Fantastic, thank you. So that was looking back. So now we'll switch our focus to next year. Obviously, more change is expected. Just want to go around and kind of get what's the most important thing, either thing you're most looking forward to, the thing you're dreading most about next year. Feel free to pick one of each if they stand out. I'll go in reverse order this time. David.
Well, if I hear the Prime Minister's wife's pregnant again, I think that'll really start to get me worried, because we're clearly in trouble. Yes, that's one thing. Let's take something slightly less predictable. Now, in all seriousness, what I think will dominate everything is workforce, and that's what I'm concerned about. And I can see my colleagues there nodding. So, going back to the point about Liz and I getting excited there, but the trouble with those roles generally across the country is the churn and the difficulty of recruiting them. So, absolutely brilliant. I rang a practice manager this morning. As you know, Tom, I've been doing NHS work today. She didn't sound a normal self. How are you doing? Oh, we just had a receptionist resign. Now, in the northeast of England, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, the biggest problem was you go out to advert and you'd have too many applicants for a job like that. Right? And it doesn't matter whether you're in Kent or whether you're in Sunderland or wherever you are. This is the issue. I've recently started working back in the NHS. Everybody's the same age as me. The practice nurses are in their 50s. And what have we, where are the skills? So going back to my point, yeah, we're going to do care, and then we're going to do this. Yeah, but where do we get the sonographer? Yes, we need a dietitian. You go, where do you get dietitians, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, nurses? Nurses like Liz are absolutely like gold dust. Yeah, so I think that's the thing. I can't see anything at the moment positive that is solving that workforce issue. In fact, it's getting worse.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So Patrick, what's top of your list for next year?
I think it would be absolutely the same. I'm an accountant. The money is driven by people. It's a rare organisation where the people costs are less than 70% of what we spend. And my worry is that David and Liz get their staff from me because my staff want out. It's just been too much for too long. It's David's point about recruiting in, but also people are just going, there must be something different. It must be better to work in Watford than in Maidstone. It's just too hard.
I think we might have lost you slightly there, Patrick. So I'll just move on to Liz.
Dreading. I'm dreading another whip round for a retirement party. I've lost 2 nurses already, my 2 senior nurses, lost a senior partner as well. Retired. They didn't just go. So yeah, I don't know. I was reading in the paper the other day that, was it like 69% of the UK workforce is looking to change jobs at the moment. It's obviously a lot less in healthcare because we've got a secure and stable income, and it's great, but it's still pretty high. So yes, maybe some of those accountants will be retraining into blue dresses. That'd be nice.
It is Friday. That's fine.
Exciting. Well, I think over the last 2 years, the communications and tech that's reaching out to normally I run my clinics with scented candles in my room and a stethoscope. The only shiny thing in my room is a torch. But now I was just checking on my phone, like I've got a couple of apps now. I can if I want to log in from anywhere, I can. If I want to get expert opinion of pediatrics, dermatology, it doesn't have to be through Watford General anymore. I can email something off. I can get an opinion back in 30 seconds. Like, what is that about? We had the Accurix guys come over again last week, talking about communications. And we were saying, oh, well, if you just change 1 or 2 things, it would save like 5 seconds. And they were like, no, 5 seconds is an achievement. That's what our goal is. We're saving 5 seconds per action. And for the tech companies, saving 5 seconds is a big win, and they're going for it. And that's probably why they're quite successful. We've got a new research program coming out to do with I don't quite understand it yet, but it's to do with inhaler compliance with our brittle COPD. Great. They're definitely our priority group, which we'll be looking to support next year. So if there's anything out there that can help us work out what inhalers are using, when they're using it, or is it appropriate, to get a better understanding of that is really useful and very exciting for next year.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you. And Ewan, what's on your list for next year?
So what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to ICSs forming and doing all sorts of wonderful things. What am I dreading is ICSs forming badly and not doing lots of wonderful things and setting the tone for the next 5 to 10 years of ICS has just been another version of rubbish. I do have to pick up on the point about workforce, because I think that's absolutely right. Within pharmacy, within my world, we've seen and we are seeing more of kind of mass migration away from community pharmacy and secondary care into PCN roles for all sorts of reasons, better for work-life balance and all that sort of stuff. That's causing us problems. But then equally, we have some PCNs where people are going into those jobs, they're not actually enjoying those jobs, there isn't the leadership and support in those jobs, so they're shifting from one PCN to another, and we're losing an awful lot of time in that churn, in that process, and not building up the skills and the expertise the way that we should be doing. So I do think that's a big problem, and that's a problem that's been 10 years in the making, if not more, and actually we're not going to be able to solve it now. If we put something in place to solve it now, we might have an answer in 10 years' time. But in the meantime, what we get is what the NHS is terrible at doing: put money now into the things that need money now, not put money now into the things that are going to need money in 10 years' time. So, I could recruit as many pharmacists as I wanted and get loads of funding for it, but there's nobody there to do it. And I worry that if we don't do it and if we don't deliver on it, then in 10 years' time, no one's going to be asking me for pharmacists anymore, and we've just trained a load of them. So that said, opportunities, I think the ICSs and everything that goes underneath it, and PCNs are a really good example from what Liz talked about earlier on about the multidisciplinary is starting to mean genuinely multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary for a long time meant 5 doctors and a nurse. It doesn't mean that anymore. It means something quite different now. It means all those sorts of different professions and perspectives, and I think that's really positive. I think there's also a real move I'm starting to see in our ICS, and I think it's happening around the country, is a move to change the way that we think about prescribing and medicines, so that we kind of get over this short-term cost cutting we've had over the last 10 years, and we're now starting to think actually prescribing is an investment. Spending money on a drug is an investment, and we need to get the best effect of it, not just spend money on that investment. So Liz, your brittle asthma patients or your COPD patients, that's a prime example of when you can spend an awful lot of money on inhalers and get really poor outcomes, when you could probably, by proactively managing these patients and taking a population health approach, you could probably better manage them, spend less on their inhalers and have better outcomes. And that's what we as a system need to become better at doing. The other thing that's very related to that I think is going to become more and more important is the sustainability agenda. And I think that is starting to be, over the last 6 to 9 months, that started to open so many doors towards doing things differently. And I think it's all about this move away from efficiency is the key. Efficiency is everything. Efficiency is go, well, actually, efficiency is very important, but actually there are lots of other things that matter just as much as efficiency. Doing things really well and doing things the right way is just as important. So I think this restructure will help to bring some of those things into a bit more focus.
Fantastic. Thank you all for that quick sort of round the table. Now we're going to get stuck into some of the questions that we've had in, and just picking up on some of your comments there, Ewan, about the evolution of ICSs. One of the questions that we had was, given the new ICS structures, how might that impact on the formulary approach to procurement? You talked there about looking at things in different ways. Are formularies still going to be the way things are done? Is it going to be different?
It's a difficult one, because formularies make sense and they're very logical, but have they ever actually had an impact on anything? It's really difficult to say. It's really difficult to know what impact they have actually had, because the key to a decent formulary comes down to good clinical guidance to support it, and it comes down to engagement and buy-in and what are the levers for making sure it applies and so on. And that's probably variable at best. So I don't think formularies are on their way out anytime soon. I think what there will be are more integrated and amalgamated ways to think about them. So at the moment we have lots and lots of different CCGs, some of whom have their own formularies, some of whom don't on a bigger scale. Things will happen on a bigger scale. I think that's just logical and sensible. It's the same evidence everybody's assessing. What might be different underneath that are the processes and pathways and things that underpin some of that stuff. You know, one trust has got this type of service in secondary care, another trust doesn't, so it needs to be done in primary care. That doesn't really matter too much. That's the stuff that can be done at place level, and that's the kind of the PCN type conversation. What an ICS should be doing, or what broader regions should be doing, is making a decision once about, actually, this is the evidence, this is the treatment that we're going to make sure everybody in our patch has access to. How they get access to it is less important. But what we can't have is somebody in Sunderland having access to this drug and somebody in South Tyneside not having access to that drug. Where they get it is kind of different. So I think we'll see a separation between kind of decision making and delivery to a certain extent. So there will be decision making where there is a significant financial impact or operational impact or something at a higher level, at a more amalgamated level, and then there will be local pathways and processes that will underpin it that could be enormously variable from one area to the other, and that doesn't really matter so much.
Yeah, okay, fantastic, really insightful answer there. Liz, I'm going to kind of follow on thematically slightly with you, with the next question come to you. Think about QOF and other incentives, sort of particularly primary care level and possibly beyond that. Picking up on what Ewan's saying there, how do you think they might evolve or be used to sort of drive that population health strategy, reducing health inequalities?
Well, as we just heard the other day, so parts of QOF have been suspended until April, but chatting to the rest of the team, I think we're just going to crack on. You know, we're still way behind. We've got a lot of catching up to do, and if we drop the ball now, I think we're going to be in trouble. So what we're going to do is carry out some bits. We might just drop back on, but you know, there's still so many patients who have such great needs that we haven't identified yet. There's a lot of case finding to do as well. You know, we need to make sure that we're doing our health checks for seriously mentally ill. Our learning difficulties patients have had a shocker for the last 2 years. We need to make sure that they've got access to the care that they've needed, because you know, their health has not improved. You know, particularly alcohol services as well. Yeah, diabetes care. We're going to just carry on, really. And because also we've got this new team, this new multidisciplinary team, we've changed a huge amount of the processes, our recalls, the structures, who's involved with each of the disease pathways. And I think if we stop now, we're not going to be able to embed that. And also the team need to find out what can they do, what skills can they bring, how do we work together. So we really need to keep going.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. So David, I'm just going to come to you. Obviously you're leading a PCN at the other end of the country. Does what Liz say there resonate with you? Is there anything that you'd add on top of that?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a board meeting on Wednesday afternoon. There must be about 16 people on the board, something like that. Obviously, in decisions like this, what I say has no bearing. It was the clinicians and the practice managers, and you know, we've got a practice nurse like Liz who's on the board. They were unanimous to absolutely follow everything that Liz said, and even to the extent you could see different camps agreeing. So some people were driven by clinical altruism, the kind of things that Liz talked about, but also others driven by we've got to keep the coding going. We've got to keep the accuracy. We've got to keep the records. It's a good discipline to keep to QOF. These systems will come back in. But it was absolutely unanimous to do all we can to carry on. And I've spoken to other people around the country this week as part of the work that you and I do, Tom, and I haven't heard anybody disagree with that, particularly the coding issue. And I won't say where it is. I spoke to one practice manager recently, Liz. They had a locum practice nurse who's a returner to practice, and they had to ask her not to work there anymore, not because of her clinical skills, but because of her coding skills. Yeah, I mean, it's just intrinsic now to primary care. So it doesn't matter if you're financially driven and you're looking at reporting and things like that, or whether you're patient focused or a combination of the two most commonly. Yeah, I think most people are carrying on. They don't want to do any alternative, but we owe it to the patients anyway. It's we've got to keep that breadth of service, and it's dispiriting that some of the mass media, if you like, the message is going out to people that primary care isn't open for those kind of services when it is.
Yeah, thank you. You used the words financially driven there, so I think I need to come to Patrick next. Patrick, we've just heard there about quaffing the other incentives and the primary care perspective. Thinking about that from your perspective in the hospital and think more broadly into the ICS, how much is known at the moment about the budgetary and financial arrangements for next year at a sort of an acute system level?
I think in detail, very, very little is known, and that is a continuing worry. As I said earlier on, there's an assumption that next year will be financially much tighter than this year has been. And the expectation is that we will have some form of formal target to restore activity levels too. We've tried a sort of fairly soft approach this year with elective recovery funds, first 75%, then 80%, 85%, and most acute hospitals have missed quite significantly, and nearly all systems have missed as well. So we're facing the next few months with an increase in winter non-elective. We for instance have cancelled all elective work this week in Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells, which was same old December situation. So that point that Liz was making of that recovery, of getting back to somewhere, we're sure that target will come, but not sure how it will be set. If it's set at a system level, are we there to support East Kent, Medway, North Kent? Because our performance is relatively close to where we were. But put against that, where we were in 1920 was completely unable to reduce our waiting lists. That level wasn't good enough. Waiting lists were already increasing. So to get back there as your number one goal, look, we've reached base camp after 2 years. Fabulous. How far off is the peak? Oh my God, it's 8 million. That's that lack of financial target that's linked to an outcome, be it productivity or, heaven forfend from an accountant. What about a health outcome that we set as a target? What are we going to talk about at population health level for a system, and where does secondary care fit with that? That can't be, let's get back to where we were, when where we were wasn't adequate. So the step forward has to be enormous. And I think, like Ewan said, part of you optimistically, after decades of experience, still comes up with, maybe we'll get it right this time. Nobody, not even, Melchick, can get it wrong 17 times in a row. So maybe this time we do get it right.
Yeah.
But
Thank you, Patrick. Sorry, Patrick, we just got a slight delay, so forgive me jumping in there. I was just hoping to build on another question that we've had in, which was around what essential data is going to be used at a system level to develop and deliver that vision. I think a lot of our audience are trying themselves to figure out, how are their things going to be counted, be it medicines, devices, interventions of some sort. What are you going to be looking at to develop what you're doing?
I don't know, and it's trite to call it a $64 million question, because it's so much bigger than that. It will be, what are we expecting to get as outcomes? But maybe the system working gives us an opportunity to say, what is good population health? How does that work? And less about counting, am I spending £500 million on medicines, but actually, what benefit do I get from spending £500 million on medicines? And could that be extended if I spent 550 or 600? Where's my crossover point? Where's my return on investment start to plateau?
Ewan, did you want to comment at all on the data question there? What data are you going to be looking at?
Well, I mean, I think Patrick very helpfully made a point very quickly right at the end of that. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we should be focusing the services around the patients rather than around the efficiency of the service, which is what we tend to have done, I think, over the last 10 years in large part. So for me, the data that I look at is about prescribing, and it's very easy for us to look at prescribing and go, well, we're an outlier with them, we're better than them, we're worse than them. But that just means what do we spend and how much stuff do we give out for each, by each patient or by each 1,000 patients or whatever. That's far less important than does it translate into good outcomes. So going back to the respiratory point again, if we've got really, really good respiratory outcomes, if we've got loads of people who've got COPD, but really small admissions, really small mortality, then we're managing that quite well. Yes, we need to do something about preventing more people getting COPD, but we're actually managing that quite well. If we're hardly spending any money and we're having really high admissions and really high mortality, then we've got that wrong again. The worst of all worlds is if we're spending a fortune and still having really poor outcomes. That's where we need to say, well, we'll just save the money. We need to look at it differently, and I think that I feel as though that message is starting to percolate through. So I was really reassured by what Patrick was saying from an accountant's point of view, is saying actually, yeah, medicines are an investment, and the same goes for all sorts of healthcare resources.
Yeah. Fantastic, thanks, Ewan. Liz, I'm going to come to you with a question that you might even build on what we've just heard around patient experience. So Ewan and Patrick have both talked about building services around the patient. From your experience seeing tens and hundreds of patients every week, how have you seen patient experience change over the last year or so, and what needs to happen to keep that moving forward?
Interesting. Just this morning, I was out doing home visits. So actually, if you'd asked me yesterday what my thoughts of patients' experience, it'd been very different from what I'll tell you now. Because my experience has been, I've been sat in a clinic. It's quite sterile. I've been on the phone, and it's not real life. It's whereas this morning I've been going from home to home to home, and I just find it just brought into such sharp focus what even small changes that are really needed by the patients. If you made some smart decisions about individual patients, the outcomes, the improvement in their life would be massive, down to buying a belt to stop the falls. I went into one poor chap and what would improve his health outcomes? What would stop him having an admission? Oh, I know what it would be. It's a belt for his trousers, not medicines, not checking what his blood pressure was when he stood up or when he was lying down, not his catheter care. It's genuinely, he needs a belt and his toenails are so long. I think every single patient I went to, because they're all housebound and we don't provide domiciliary podiatry, oh my goodness, what a ridiculous saving, false saving. They just needed, some of these patients just needed really simple, individualized interventions, and not this kind of broad stroke, I'll go give you a telephone call, how are you doing? No, actually going out and visiting them. where did the modern matrons go? Like, what happened to our well-established, district nursing team? Now we rely like 80% on locums at the moment in Watford on the district nursing team. There's no continuity whatsoever. Sorry, I'm ranting now, aren't I? Tom, you're gonna have to keep me on track. I really
we'll mute you when you go
blew me away this morning.
So I suppose in terms of that bit, then what needs to happen to get us there in terms of that really individualised care on a PCN and larger into system level?
Well, can I quickly come in? Tom, I'll let you go back to Liz. If people looked at my LinkedIn post this morning, and you asked us about positive things, NHSX and NHS Digital effectively been abolished. They've been wrapped up into this new transformation directorate. And that, to me, going back to some of Ewan's points, kind of heard all this sort of thing before, but let's hope it works, and good luck to those who make it work. Because going back to the respiratory example and Liz's example, for too long we've been trying to count things as respiratory or diabetes. It's not. It's the man with the belt. I remember sitting, Ewan, on the early days of whatever the Vanguard was in Sunderland, and people saying we've reduced diabetes admissions by 20% or something. You think, well, the reason people get admitted is because their daughter went away for the weekend, or they didn't have the dog, or their neighbour wasn't around, or where Ewan and I live, the football team loses, and then people have a bad weekend. Seriously. But it's that holism, isn't it? If we can bring the data into that pathway, and as Liz said, get really close to it. But we've got to overcome things like, which hopefully integration will do, sharing information across health and social care, sharing information with the police in the right kind of way, and so on. And it's so many information governance things that stood in the way of it. I know some of them are important, but it's looking at that holism. But for our friends who are listening, this is a real challenge, I think, because it's difficult. Ewan would be the expert on this. How do you provide the evidence that says our inhaler is better when the reason someone gets admitted is because they don't have a belt, or their daughter went away for the weekend, or their neighbour who had the car was off the road, so they couldn't take them to, and so it goes on, those kind of social issues. And, as any clinician will tell you, it's very rare that people have a specific condition. It's a whole basket. That gentleman who lives in the city, I bet he's probably diagnosed with 5 or 6 different things, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's on 8 different drugs then that Ewan's looking at going, crikey, Liz, he's on 8 different oral drugs 4 times a day. What do you expect? That's why he's falling over and getting hypertensive. But anyway, great, Tom, I've spoke too much. But I'm really encouraged, and for everyone listening, that's been announced today to the NHS, this new transformation directorate. It wraps up the data and it wraps up pathways, all in the same directorate. So fingers crossed, that's a sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a real signal of intent, isn't it, to do things differently. Something is on our list of questions around, who should our audience be speaking with when it comes to, getting change into the system. I wonder if we could just quickly go around and everyone, 1 or 2 stakeholders, as it were, in the system. Who's going to be driving the change in terms of your part of the system? Liz, I'll come back to you first. In terms of things happening differently in primary care.
If we want any changes done, it's always the directors at the PCN. If we're looking to make anything different to my little world, it's at the PCN level. Yeah,
okay, thank you. Ewan, who's going to drive change in your world?
I mean, I would agree with that, and I don't think it is just the PCN world is. I think PCN clinical directors increasingly will speak for the voice of their populations. Now, that's a smaller population than in CCG is, but actually, I would hope that under the new system, PCN clinical directors will be able to, and the teams around them will be able to have the autonomy and the authority to do the things that they know are the right things for their population, and to do it joined up with other partners like community pharmacy and like community services and like charities and things that are happening within that footprint. And inevitably what we'll see will be some PCNs that are fantastic, that fly, that then set the set the bar for the others. So I think PCN clinical directors are going to be enormously important in this. But I do think the if I was to name one other person, it's kind of a toss up between two, and I think it's probably equal. The director of finance for the ICS is going to dictate an awful lot of this kind of stuff. It just is going to be how we deal with joined up budgets, how we deal with freedom to act over money and all that kind of stuff. That's going to be massively important. I would probably rather selfishly say that I think that ICS, chief pharmacist, lead pharmacist, directors of pharmacy, whatever they end up being called, and hopefully everywhere has one, I think is going to have a really, really important impact, because it helps it helps in those joined up conversations about how resources are used. And we can talk about all the stuff we've talked about putting patients at the centre and looking at things on a slightly broader footprint. That's one thing to do that with secondary care, but it's harder to draw kind of a direct correlation between output and outcome. But I think with prescribing, you very clearly can, because if we just, my day job in Sunderland is basically manage a £50 million budget and make it as cheap as possible. Well, then that's completely ignoring the fact that, that £50 million is an investment in reducing all sorts of adverse outcomes happening to people. So you've given me the perverse incentive that is to not necessarily do the right thing by the patients. So I'm hoping that having the kind of senior expertise and a voice at a level that hasn't necessarily been heard before can start to change some of those conversations a bit.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Patrick. We've lost your video, but we've still got your audio, I think. From your perspective, who are the key stakeholders in sort of driving changes in acute and hospital care?
Ewan's been very kind about the CFO at ICS level. The fact we will have one voice going no to more people is a good thing, of course. But I'm not sure it's the type of change that we necessarily want to drive. I still see that it will be clinical leads throughout acute care. We're now going into an organisation that hasn't existed before. We'll have billions of problems, literally, and the clinician that comes forward saying this is a solution, they'll be listened to, because otherwise there's just a big piece of paper with lots and lots of problems. How do we reconfigure cardiology? That'll be a cardiologist that will lead that. How do we reconfigure orthopedics? Similarly. What do we do about diabetic patients? All right, let's flip that around. That's people living with diabetes. It's not a diabetes patient. What else is happening with that person? And that gets back to Liz's point and to Ewan's point, that if you're going to have that patient focus, you have to recognise they don't fit into nice little blocks, no matter how hard we try in secondary care to do that. It is about finding the clinical voice. The opportunity is that we can link up secondary and primary care and find a better voice and find a way of showing that investment in medicines and in devices that says, do this, save money later on. But at a global ICS level, the acute sector is safe once you've shut at least one acute hospital per ICS.
Yeah, okay. Just taking from that then, I think in integration, I suppose, certainly I probably a lot of us have thought change will be achieved through consensus, so that the system comes together to decide on how to do things. Am I taking what you're saying, Patrick, that actually that will be someone drives that and then consensus goes along the way, rather than everyone convening a working party and saying, right, how are we going to sit down and solve this? Yeah, okay. David, we're just talking about stakeholders. Is there any particular stakeholders that...
I'll throw in, I agree with everything people are saying. I'm taking up Liz's point. So our PCN, let's say somebody's got a good idea. We're then going to go and talk to the transformation lead at the local foundation trust. We'll talk to the ambulance trust. We talk to the mental health trust, yeah? So I think one of the advices I give to people out there, you and I, Tom, we're often around those people. and we'll say to them, so how often does someone from pharma or devices or diagnostics come and see you? And they usually say it never happens. And I think those people's skills at the moment is most of them are in Foundation Trust. I can't wait for them to go out onto a broader integrated footprint. The system transformation, system improvement, those kind of skills, the people who've got the Lean Six Sigma and they know how to unlock the system and they're close to the clinicians, they're often ex-nurses or clinicians, it'd be brilliant. The other thing I'd say, again, as advice to people, taking Ewan's points as well, is a job I would love to have now if I was younger and I was back in the service is to be a place lead, to be something like the place lead for long-term conditions in a well-funded health economy. I think that I'd just aspire to that. So you're not a commissioner, you're not a provider, you've got a very clear role, and maybe you've got something like women and children's services or long-term conditions, a broad remit. And I think it could be a really exciting time to be in that position. I think the challenge for some of the people listening is the breadth of disciplines and backgrounds that are going to fill those posts. A lot of those people are coming in from social care, and that's a new kind of person.
Yeah, thank you. And a question that's actually come in as we've been speaking is around place and primary care and asking about whether there's still a role for GP federations. What do you make of that, David?
For me, yeah, absolutely. I'll be brief. When we first started to change a couple of years ago, I know that people who were in London who set up the PCN policy thought that GP federations and alliances would just fold over. I think those of us like yourself who've run those kind of organisations are new and different. And so a good PCN, if it's got a coterminous federation alliance alongside it, is in a really powerful position. And that's the way things are constructed. It'd be interesting to see where we are in a couple of years' time, but certainly at the moment, you'd be a foolish group of practices that didn't have an alliance or federation alongside your PCN.
Yeah, thank you. So we've still got a few questions left, so I'm going to be a bit quick fire if I can do with the other questions that we've got. See if we can tick off as many as we can do. Liz, one's come in about community diagnostic centres, community diagnostic hubs. What do you make of that idea, and how do you think they might work in practice? What impact might they have?
Oh, well, it's what David's saying. That's where your federation's going to step up to the mark. You know, there is a lot of opportunity there. You know, it doesn't have to be down at Watford General. You don't have to go and fight with their car park. You know, castles have moats and drawbridges. Watford General has a car park at the bottom of the hill. You know, we've got to get these teams out into the communities and closer to the patients so that I can have a COVID secure spirometry hub that is quality assured. Because at the moment, small, you know, we're not a small PCN, we're pretty big, but we're not big enough to see the big volumes of spirometry so that, you know, the nursing teams have the experience and the facilities to make sure it's really good quality measurables. But if we had a diagnostic hub, fantastic. You know, why do I have to send somebody? Why do I really hate doing referrals for district nurses to go out and take bloods when, you know, if it was closer to home, maybe I could get that done, you know, within the community. You know, somebody could support the patient to go over and have bloods done. Before I retire, I really want to see diagnostic hubs so that I can, you know, safely get bloods from my patients with learning difficulties. You know, they're all needle phobic, they're petrified, they don't understand, but they'll let me take a sample of blood from their finger. That's not a bother. You know, so I definitely get the federations. This is where you could really support us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Ewan, I'm going to come to you at the other end of the scale. A question that I think a lot of our audience are interested in. What needs to happen for ICSs to take on specialised commissioning and the budgets that come with it?
Well, the ICS needs to exist first of all, so we're some way off that even happening. I mean, I think it is, you know, that's a slightly flippant answer, but actually it's true. It doesn't exist, and we might be only a few months away from it existing as a legal entity, but we're a long way off it functioning in the way that it's intended to function. So I think, you know, it's got to take on everything that CCGs do initially. That's a really, really big transition that gets very scary the closer we get to it. Then the following year, it's got to take on all the other primary care services. It's got to take on community pharmacy, optometry, and dentistry. Again, they're complex things to do. They're complex. They're big money. You know, and then specialised commissioning on top of it is something, again, that's completely different, that actually most of the people who will be automatically moving into ICSs don't necessarily have experience of. And we don't know to what degree NHS England is going to give some of that stuff up and what it's going to give up and things. So when it comes to specialised commissioning, I feel like we're still some way off that. So in terms of what needs to happen, I think the answer is probably quite a lot needs to happen before then.
And do you think it will be systems earning the right to have that sort of earned autonomy is the phrase that I've heard used?
I think it will have to be. I mean, like anything else, just like, you know, PCNs and anything else, there'll be ones that work really well and fly, and there'll be others that are really, really struggling. And I can't see, you know, I can envisage a situation whereby, for example, in April of 2023, the commissioning of all of those other 3 primary care sectors doesn't move into all ICSs, because actually some of them aren't in a position to be able to do it. So NHS England holds on to some because it's the safest thing to do. But it might be that actually there are some that are doing really well that then take it on at an earlier rate. So I don't think it will be this kind of big bang for everything, not even necessarily for every kind of conditioning or every type of commissioning that will go all in one go. I think it'll have to be more staggered than that. I don't think that's the intention at the moment, but I can't see how it would happen any other way.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, specialised commissioning is an insurance scheme. It's a risk scheme. You know, Ewan's in the first ICS. They might go further. A smaller one like Cornwall, I'm not sure how they do it. The whole thing is risk management, and there's got to be that assurance there. If you get slightly wrong with SpecCom financially, and also in terms of, unfortunately, very ill people dying or some kind of political scandal is too close. But you've got to be big enough and stable enough to cover the insurance scheme. Basically, that's what it is.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Patrick, another question that we've had in is, here's one for you. How can industry help NHS trusts and ICSs to shift the focus towards value-based procurement instead of unit cost?
It would be delightful if we didn't pay any invoices until we'd shown the delivery of the value base. So, you know, if we're going to reduce hospitalizations in 10 years' time, let's prescribe the medicine, record the number of issues, and record the hospitalizations in 10 years. If it works, we give you a bundle of dough, and if it doesn't, well, let's come up with another value base. More sensibly, we have to look at different procurement models. We have to move away from the unit cost, but we have to start saying, what's the overall package? What are we expecting to happen in other parts of the system? Where do we expect to see a shift to primary care, to community facilities? How can the procurement model support that, rather than us rubbing our hands because we've managed to get a medicine that's 15 pence cheaper than Sunderland, and we're going to use a gazillion units of it, and look, we've saved and they've lost. You know, it's got to be more about where does it fit with a patient pathway, and I think that becomes a key. And just to hop back to SpecCom, because I like the insurance model, and SpecCom have used insurance to bail out their lack of knowledge of what's going on. But, you know, things like critical care, neonatal care, they're not SpecCom. They could move across. You know, when my middle child was born and was whisked off to neonatal intensive care for 7 days, we didn't go, oh, locally commissioned birth, Speccom for neonates, locally commissioned discharge, that's a nonsense. The pathway was, oh, you're not very big, you've been very premature, you're not very well, we'll look after you. That could move. But that provides a model for the value-based proposition, for the value-based procurement. What is actually the pathway? Not how can we chisel out a little advantage in secondary care compared to primary care or to community care or to that secondary care across the border. Actually, what's the value to the patient? How do we explicate that? How do we tie the procurement up to that? And going back, don't charge us for 10 years, that'll help. Okay.
Brilliant, thanks Patrick. So another question, I'm going to go around for a brief answer from everyone if I can. Currently, what's of more value to the NHS? Is it clinical and quality advances or system and capacity improvements? Liz.
Oh,
Come on, Liz, what's the answer to that one?
oh God. I think I'm on a 13-day stretch, so let's say capacity. On my next day off next week. Yeah, can I have capacity? I'd like cloned nurses and Patrick in address, please.
Yeah, okay.
Countdown's on. 3 hours to go.
Ewan,
what's more important to you at the moment?
I mean, I would agree. I think the system is just stretched everywhere, and we get short-term funding in that realistically we can't use because we haven't got anywhere to put it or anyone to get to do it. Yeah, I mean, obviously in an ideal world you'd want both, but I think the acute problem is the capacity. I think the fact that COVID hasn't gone away, and not only has it changed the way that we work, but it's still there. It means for secondary care facilities, it means still double running services. So you have a green site and a red site, or a hot site and a cold site, or whatever it is. All of that stuff is greater stretches on the capacity that wasn't even there in the first place. So I think that would have to be the priority. I mean, how we're going to get through this winter is going to be really, really difficult, let alone next winter and 3 winters after that. That'll get you so far, but everyone's been running on it for 2 years, so
that's all I got. That's all I got.
Yeah.
I don't need free pens anymmoment.
The sight of Patrick in address might give you another boost for another week or two, but it's just got to be capacity. That's all there is at the moment. So yeah, that would absolutely be a priority for me, I think.
Patrick, do you dissent to the idea that system and capacity improvements are more important than clinical advances? Or do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. It's capacity. It's capacity. That comes back to the first point we made. The capacity is linked to workforce. Liz shouldn't have to do 13 days in a row. Nobody should.
Yeah.
Come on, it's wrong. How do we change that wrongness?
Yeah, I know. Tom, you've heard me talk a lot about a thing that it's about a van driver. It will happen. Going back to Liz's point about community diagnostic centres, so we can't do. There's a whole load of pathway work we can't do in our PCN because about 2:30 this afternoon, there is a guy who has to park his van up outside his house because he lives so far away from the hospital site, and he's the guy who collects the samples. It's system every time. How many times do you hear someone say, I'm trained in cognitive therapy, we've got people who can take bloods, we can do this, we can do that. We've got Liz, who's a prescriber, who does stuff IV, and then, but they can't do it because we can't get a room on a Tuesday. Propco have stopped us doing this. You can't link it up to system 1. This FT's got a different system from this FT, and so it goes on. It's system time. It's so frustrating that fantastic people are out there, got the skills, and they can't use them.
Yeah, brilliant. So we're nearly out of time, so I'm just going to go around another one-word answer from each of you. It's the questions: what knowledge or capability would be most valuable to you from an industry representative coming to see you? So if someone's coming to see you, what do you want them to come and see you about, I suppose, is the question. Any volunteers to go first?
I'll volunteer. It won't be one answer, one word. I want somebody to come and tell me what I'm doing wrong for the patient. Why
Brilliant.
why do they have to be with me at all in an acute setting?
Yeah, okay, fantastic, thank you. Everyone's looking pensive for their own answers.
Go on.
David, I'm going to come to you next.
I do a similar one. What I'm looking for all the time is how. So is Liz done it in Watford? This is why you and I have got a relationship with Liz. It's like she'll say, well, we do this or we do that, and you learn from it. And I'm particularly, and I'll keep this promise, you can contact me through Mtech Access. I'm really interested in any rural sheep farm type, Emmerdale farm type places that have delivered clinical change. It doesn't matter what specialty it is. That's the PCN I work with. If you've got an idea and it's worked anywhere, it doesn't matter what clinical area it is, I'm interested.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Ewan, I'll come to you next.
I can just see that the one word Liz wants to say is help, but I don't know if she's going to find a different way to phrase that. For me, I think what industry does really well is data and intelligence, and actually that's the bit that we don't always do all that well. So I think that's the sort of thing that we could benefit from. That's something that would help us to direct and make the most out of the services and the functionality and the capacity that we have. Something that would help us to direct that better.
Brilliant, thanks Ewan. And Liz, I'll come to you for the last one.
Sorry Tom, I'm going to come in just about you. Simulated modelling, that's another thing. If people are out there just backing up Ewan's thing, I've loved it for 20 years. We can never afford it. The companies have got it. If you've got the software, if you've got the techniques around it, we'd love to see it.
Yeah, good stuff. Liz, final word to you today.
I can't do a webinar without talking about antibiotics. I'm really sorry. There must be a cream or some sort of vaccine for it, but I just can't. Got to mention antibiotics at every webinar. Okay, so my day-to-day, I want industry to come to me with a solution for every single day, every 10 to 15 minutes. I've got a urine infection. Mostly it's I've got coughs, colds. You know, it's not COVID. I know it's not COVID. How do you know that? Because I don't feel unwell, but I want antibiotics. And so I can now rule out in primary care with my scented candles and my headset and my I can say, oh, this isn't COVID, or this is COVID, or if it's not COVID, then what the hell else is it? You know, is this influenza? Is this a chest infection? Like, what? Come on, stop me guessing. You know, give me some better diagnostics for this. You know, is it something I can stick in the post? Like, oh, look what we can do now. We've got lateral flows everywhere. I've got, you know, I'm now sending referrals. The receptionists are now sending referrals direct to the pharmacies. You know, can I use that flow? You know, can I put more diagnostics into pharmacies so that we can say, yes, it's not COVID, but you still feel really, really unwell. And antibiotics may or may not help, but I'm not quite sure because I'm not here to guess, and we're prescribing too many antibiotics. Industry, help me! Help me! You clever people!
There is a cry for help if ever I heard when you were right. So thank you. We're going to have to draw it to a close there. Thank you, Ewan, Liz, Patrick, David, for joining me this afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in at home. If you've got any more questions lingering that we haven't got to, please get in touch via info@mtechaccess.co.uk. Also, anything else that you need to understand better about the NHS, please drop us a line. We'll be back at the end of January for another edition, all to be confirmed between now and then. So in the meantime, have a Merry Christmas. Thank you very much for supporting us this year, and we look forward to working with you again next year. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to find out more about our work with the NHS or how we could support your market access goals, please email info@mtechaccess.co.uk or visit our website at mtechaccess.co.uk.